Welcome to Creative Thursdays. My name is Jessica Arsenault and I'll be your host for this event. I work in the Learning and Community Engagement team at the National Gallery of Canada. As we begin this event, I want to acknowledge that the National Gallery of Canada is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who have been the guardians of this land since time immemorial, in the present, and for the future. Although we're meeting virtually tonight, the land on which the gallery stands has been a space of meeting and gathering since time immemorial and continues to be today. As we're coming from a variety of territories today, I encourage each of us to learn more about the land on which we are so that we can act in good ways. Tonight's event will take place in 4 parts. First, a short introduction to the event by me. Then, artist Golriz Rezvani will present the setup and tools required for today's workshop. While you prepare your space, my colleague Alexia will share an artwork from the Uninvited exhibition. And finally, we'll spend the rest of the session with Golriz Rezvani in a painting workshop. A few notes before I pass it on to the artist. This workshop will take place fully in English. If you are interested in following a French painting workshop, the event will take place later today and will be available on our YouTube channel in the following weeks. Cet atelier se déroulera en anglais seulement. L'atelier en français aura lieu plus tard aujourd'hui et sera disponible sur notre chaîne YouTube dans les prochaines semaines si vous n'avez pas eu la chance d'y assister. This talk is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Throughout the evening, you're invited to communicate your questions and comments with us using the Q&A that you will find at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to your question. If anyone is experiencing any difficulties with their connection to Zoom or audiovisual settings during the event, please contact Connected Canadians toll-free at 1-877-304-5813. I would now like to present artist Golriz Rezvani. Born in Iran, Golriz Rezvani holds a Master's of Fine Arts degree from Azad University, Tehran, and currently teaches at the Emily Carr University of Art and Design, as well as at the Vancouver Film School. Working most often in mixed media, she's interested in creating surreal worlds that narrate day-to-day life. Welcome, Golriz.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us to tonight's workshop. I'm going to switch to my workspace camera, and before that, I just wanted to mention that this painting tonight is inspired by Prudence Howard's painting called Roland, and I will talk about that in a bit when I start the painting. Now let's switch to my other camera in order to show you the setup. Here is my table. I have the paper that I taped to my surface with the masking tape. It is about 8 to 11 by 11 paper, and I have acrylic paint. Over here on my palette, I have titanium white, I have primary yellow, I have the cadmium red, and I have the magenta. Here I have alizarin red and my violet, ultramarine blue, and the green. As for my brushes, I have a whole bunch of different types of brushes. It doesn't matter what kind of, what brand you have. I have a whole bunch of different ones. I have medium sizes and bigger sizes. Also, I have fine brushes in order to get more into details if I need to. All that matters for brushes is you get soft bristle brushes, so you won't end up with really harsh brush strokes on your painting. On top of everything else, I have some rags, paper towels, and some water buckets. I will be using my matte medium as well, Liquitex matte medium. If you don't have this, you can use your clear glue, whatever it is. I will go over that and talk about it. And this is about the setup that we have right now over here.
Thank you, Golriz. So I now welcome my colleague Alexia, interpreter at the gallery, who will share an artwork from the Uninvited exhibition with us while we set up our space at home for the workshop. So welcome, Alexia.
Hello. So this is our featured work for tonight, Rolande by Prudence Heward. I'll tell you a little bit about the artist herself. Prudence Heward was part of a small group of women artists who were active in Montreal between the World Wars. Although she also produced landscapes and still lifes, she was primarily known for her figure painting. And her portraits of physically robust and psychologically complex women challenged conventional representations of the female subject. Her women, always set in a landscape, appear independent and brooding, even defiant. Now, before doing an analysis of the painting, I'll brief you on the life of Heward. Heward was well-educated and nationally successful. She was born to a wealthy Montreal family in 1896, and her art education began at the early age of 12 at the Art Association of Montreal. The artist was born severely asthmatic, and after a car accident in 1939, in which she injured her painting arm and her nose, her health declined further. She eventually succumbed to her illness while seeking treatment in Los Angeles in 1947. The year following her death, the National Gallery of Canada held a memorial exhibition in 1948, which traveled around the country. And Heward was associated with the Beaver Hall Group, and she was a founding member of the Canadian Group of Painters, as well as the Contemporary Art Society, as well as a member of the Federation of Canadian Artists. Now, back to the painting. Rolande by Prudence Heward is a striking portrait of a young French-Canadian during the late 1920s. We don't know much about her. It's unclear how Heward and Rolande got to know each other, but her portrait tells a story. Rolande is depicted with a tight mouth and slanted eyebrows, giving her an intense, almost angry appearance. We see her in a bright pink apron, with her hands firmly planted on her hips, and her defiant expression extending beyond the edge of the canvas. In the painting, we see a fence and a white farmhouse in the background, which place Rolande in a picturesque rural landscape of l'Île d'Orléans near Quebec. Heward often painted women in rural settings since she enjoyed painting and sketching landscapes around Brockville, where her family owned a cottage. Rolande is rendered with a stiff and imposing robustness that defies the traditional depiction of passive and delicate women within art history. This was painted in 1929, and Heward created this portrait during a time when artistic tradition and society in general were undergoing a radical transformation. Her deliberate placement of Rolande outside the fence, away from her home, serves to emphasize her independence and strength. The interesting placement of the farmhouse around Rolande's head suggests that although she looks to life outside the farmyard fence, her consciousness might still be tied to the house. Her troubled gaze reveals her inner struggle or anger. This is a prime example of how Heward's painting of physically and psychologically strong women offered a new interpretation of Canadian women in the 1920s. With Rolande's strong and cold posture, her hands on her hip, and her leg forward, she shows that she's in control of her environment and her person. Heward's paintings of women were often criticized as lacking in beauty. The emotional power of her paintings lie in the fact that they oblige the viewer to think about the reality of her subjects, that these are actually real women. Painting women as real, unidealized people with their own subjectivity asks the viewer to consider who they are rather than how they look. These women aren't objects for our gaze. Instead, they look back at us. Heward was one of the first Canadian female artists to be rediscovered in the 1970s and 1980s, when feminist art historians began to organize exhibitions and write about female artists who had been well known and respected during their lifetime, but had not received the adequate historical attention. She's now renowned for her provocative portraits of women and her expressionistic treatment of color, and how she gave new meaning to the depiction of female subjects in the 1920s and 1930s. And now that's all I have to say about this piece, so it brings us to the end of our segment on this featured work.
Thank you, Alexia, for sharing this artwork with us. So I'll now invite Golriz again so that we can start with the workshop. If you have any questions during the event for the artist, you're invited to put them to the Q&A, and I'll bring them to her attention later during the event. Thank you. Welcome, Golriz.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you, Alexia, for the beautiful introduction on her work. While I was listening, I actually saw a couple of questions. I just want to address them right now. The paper that I'm using right now, or you can use, is normally the mixed media heavy-weighted paper. What I'm using right now is the Conson 300 gram mixed media paper. And the container of this guy over here, it's a matte medium. It's Liquitex matte medium. I'm using this for two purposes. One, to use it instead of a glue. The other one is using it as a glazing medium, which is not normal, but I will go over that and I will explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. For today's workshop, I actually can tell that I divided this whole process in 4 segments, 4 parts. The first steps that you need to take in order to actually create this type of painting is plan and design your sketch. As you see over here, I have 4 different types of compositions, roughly sketched so that I know exactly what I want to do, or roughly, what I want to do with my images. There is a couple of different ways to approach this. One way is you can actually collect all your images, whatever it is, and try to find out a story from them and then start sketching based on what you have. I didn't do it that way. I designed my painting based on Prudence painting because I wanted to focus on the identity and have that kind of landscape background. So what I did, I first sketched what I wanted to do, and then I went and took photos of myself and collected some more. What I have over here is 2 different type of copy printed images, and this is exactly what we want. We don't want to have images from your albums or photos or magazines, really, because those ones have a thicker texture and they're not that useful for this type of project. In my supply list, I know I mentioned just to have black and white, but just so you know how each one of them would look if you use them in your paintings, I chose one like colored image and one black and white. When you have decided on what images you're going to use, you need to carefully cut around your image with a really nice outline so that you wouldn't end up with a white or like unclean edges, because this is really essential when we start painting. So this was the first stage. Now that I have my design decided, I collected my images, now I can actually start working on my painting. Before doing that, I wanted to mention about copyright as well. If you decide to download images from internet or get the images from magazines, please be aware of the copyright and don't violate them. You can absolutely use those as long as you're not presenting them as your own artwork. Your best bet would be just choosing and picking your own personal images. Now to the canvas or to our paper over here. One thing before, again, starting painting on a paper with acrylic, you need to actually prime your paper with gesso, or if you don't have gesso, you can simply use your white, titanium white, and have a layer of that on your paper. The reason we do this is because we want to have a less absorbent and smoother surface for our acrylic. If you've already bought canvases from store, they are normally already primed, so you don't need to take this step for that. When it comes to gesso, there are lots of different type of brands. It doesn't matter really. Over here, I believe I have the cheapest one, and that should do. So how you apply it is you actually take a clean dry brush, dip it in your gesso, or pick your titanium white, and horizontally one layer, then vertically another layer, smoothly spread out your gesso or white titanium all over your surface and let it dry for about 10 minutes or so. do not start painting before that layer is dried up. And I understand probably you don't have that ready right now, so don't worry about it. You can, we can start and you'll see what happens when you actually paint on a paper which is not primed. So I'm going back to my initial image that I chose. I'm just going to place it to figure out where I want to have my horizon line over here. Again, this is my design. You can come up with your own based on the images that you already have. As for color scheme, one hint would be using what you already have in your images. For instance, over here I prefer to use lots of like purples and yellows and those peach colors to get some sort of a harmonious composition in my overall painting. So in order to do that, I'm going to pick some magenta with my big brush and some purple, and then the complementary color, which is yellow to purple, and try to create that dark shade that I want to have for my foreground. I start applying the color directly on my surface. Don't worry if you get lots of like brush strokes. That's actually the beauty of it. What you can do is just like the way I'm doing, you can move your brushes back and forth around, change the direction to get this funky, cool little type of texture on the surface. I'm going to fill up this whole area, which is my foreground. Now I want to make it more diverse in terms of color. I'd like to add a little bit of blue and purple and some other colors in between. So as you notice, I directly went into my blue that was on my ultramarine blue that was on my palette and just put it on there because I wanted, instead of to mix that color on my palette, I wanted just directly mix it on my surface. Now unfortunately, the brush that I'm working right now is quite tough and, it's not moving that easily. So I'm just going to change it to something that is more flexible and softer so that I can get rid of some of those brush strokes a little bit and smooth the surface out. If you choose like a green color scheme, that's perfect. You can choose to like use green in some areas, use some yellows, and you can add some blues on some areas, just like the way I'm doing. This way, with short strokes and repetitive movement, you get some sort of a, how can I say, like a grassy type of looking or ground looking texture on your foreground. I'm actually going to use a little bit of green as well. That was too sharp. It's okay, I can blend it in. As long as my background, my first and second layer is wet, it is easy enough for me to blend that color in. When you're doing this, be careful to not do it too much, because if you do so, then you'll end up with a muddy color, and that's what we don't want to. Don't worry about this part if it's not super clean. We will modify that in a second. Now, it's where the magic actually starts right now. You dip your brush in water, fully loaded with only water. Now, what I'm going to do right now is spatter some of the water on this foreground to create a texture. And I will show it to you in a bit what kind of a texture I'm looking for. So I'm, again, loading my brush with water fully, spattering some water on the foreground, and wait and let it sit. So this is the type of texture that I will be achieving by doing this spatter. And I will show that to you in a second how it works. I'm going to leave that side by itself, and I'm just going to move on the top part of my painting. I'm trying to get some sort of a sunset, sunrise color scheme on the top part of my painting. In order to get that, I just go with my cadmium red. You can use orange. I'm going to do the mix with the magenta as well. I start with the darker colors. This is one of the questions actually that I receive commonly from students. What kind of colors should we start our painting with? Should we start with lighter colors or darker colors? And the answer for acrylic is either. Honestly, you can do either, but for this specific painting over here, I'm starting from the darker to lighter. As you see over here, unlike my foreground, I'm gently moving back and forth horizontally my hand to achieve a smoother surface rather than that harsh first stroke that I was getting from the lower part of my painting. Just like before, I'm mixing some colors here, and in the same time, I go back to my white, directly pick it up from the palette and mix it over here. As long as you have your background is wet, you can easily blend things easily, completely. Let's check this out here. I just want to clean that up because some of the paint from the lower layer are showing off. That's not what I want. That's bugging me. I'm going to create some sort of a smooth transition from here to there. So as I work through, going through the higher part of my painting, I add more white because this is how it is actually in landscape. Sky becomes bluer and lighter as we go further up. Again, I'm using my full side of brush, which is the flat brush. If I feel like my brush is not picking the paint enough and it's not moving it as much as I want to, I just dip my brush back into water, gently add a little bit of water to it so that the colors can go back again. So this is what you might get. If you feel like the contrast is too high, you can add a little bit more of darker shades. You can add more like clouds or some of the orange if you want, some of the fuchsia if you want, if you're looking for. No problem in that. It's up to you. You can even be more playful and add a little bit of yellow or blues. But be careful if you already have yellows to not add blues because it makes your sky look green. Now I'm going back to the lower part of my painting, and I'm going to lift up all those water drops that I created in the beginning by gently putting and pressing my paper towel. As soon as you see it is picking up lots of paint, you need to change and find refold it and get a cleaner surface so that it can pick up some more clearly. As you see, I'm not really pressing this really hard because I don't want to pick up other paints from this painting. I don't want to pick up the rest of the painting that is underneath. I just want to pick up the paints that were watered down. And keep repeating this process until your whole texture is actually there. Sometimes it might happen that you actually pick up some of the pigments from the layers that you don't want to. So no, don't worry about that. What you can do, this is actually what's happening over here for me. I don't know if it's visible on camera or not, but what you can do is you can go back with your acrylic and modify it. Acrylic is a very forgiving material. If you make a mistake, there is no problem with that. You can go and fix it. I will show how to fix it as well. If you feel like you're looking at it and you feel like, okay, it's not enough, I want to add more drops, so you can pick your smaller brush, go back in there, add more on the areas that you want to, and then pick them up again, no problem. If you feel like, okay, I didn't want all my blues and like magentas to be removed from that area, no problem. Create that color again on your palette and go back to it and paint on top and cover all those areas that were picked up by your paper towel. Just like that. Okay. Now we are done with our second stage, which was creating the background. Now it's time to apply your images on your painting. One thing to note is you need to wait until this surface, this layer is completely dried, and then you can apply this. Otherwise, it will be peeling off and it will give you a really hard time. I'm just going to move this surface quickly right now to show you how you should apply glue to your images. On the back of your image, right now here, I'm using Liquitex matte medium. If you have Mod Podge, that would be a good replacement like option. If not, please don't use the school glue. I know most of you might have the clear school glue. That's okay if you use it right now, but for future, Mod Podge is the best because it kind of dries up clear and it allows us to work on the painting with glazing. So I dropped some of the matte medium on the back of my image. I'm going to spread it out with a bigger brush, actually, all evenly, trying to smooth it out, try to get all the corners as much as you can. And then bring back your painting. Don't do what I'm doing right now. My painting is still wet, and I will show you what happens right now if I apply it. So again, with my matte medium, I'll go on top of my image. This will dry clear. Some of other matte mediums, which is like golden, it gives a milky looking image if you put it applied on top of your image. So try to avoid that. Don't use that. Only Liquitex is the one that gets a complete clear look. Mod Podge is the other one, and don't do that with school glue because it's non-water resistant. It can be, this is what happens when I try to apply my medium or my glue on top of my image, which is being applied on a surface that is not dried. The paint from the surface comes on top. The reason we are doing this step is that, number one, I'm protecting the surface of my image, which I'm later going to paint on. Number two, I'm getting rid of all the bubbles that might be created underneath of this image right now. As you see over here, I have some bubbles. I press really hard. As you see, there are creating some bubbles, and one of the things that is adding to these bubbles is the wet surface. So in order to save some time for this workshop right now, I actually created another painting, and I will show it to you in a second. After you do this stage as well, like you apply your glue behind the image and on top of it, you need to let it sit for about 10 minutes to dry up, depending on your room temperature. And then you can actually start glazing on the painting. Right now, here is what I have the next step after that. I created a background, I glued my images, I did it based on my composition. Now it's time to do the glazing. What is glazing? Glazing is a wash of a diluted color or paint on top of something else. For instance, you can dilute your orange with water, which makes a really translucent and opaque color like that. And let me show you on a surface. You can see through that layer. This is exactly what we want to do. You can dilute your paint and colors with water. There is no problem in that. The best choice is to actually using the glazing medium, which most brands have that. I don't, unfortunately, have it in my studio right now. I ran out of it. I'm going to use matte medium, which works pretty much as well as glazing medium. So how I'm using it is pour some of my matte medium on my clean surface or palette and get some of my magenta and this purple over here and mix it with the matte medium, just like that. Then I will go, let me actually grab something like that. I will go on top of my painting and apply that translucent paint on top of my image, the copied image. I don't want that to overpower the image. What I'm doing, I'm going all around the shades and bringing out more definition when it comes to color. This is actually the way when the black and white images were getting colored. They would get the negatives and they would paint with a translucent and opaque color behind it. They would give it a color. This is what I'm doing right now. And for the shadows, I will be picking darker colors. And when it comes to highlights, I will be using some of my white and brighter colors on top of it. This stage is quite precise in comparison with the last stage because you need to pay attention exactly to your shapes, to the colors, gently apply your paint on everywhere. If you want to, you can actually enhance the color quality. So if you compare this area with that area, you see how grayish and like muted colors you got here. Whereas here I'm adding more definition to it and contrast to the painting. Right now I'm going to actually show you the difference between the diluted color with matte medium versus water. And you'll see what's happening if I do that. So here in my palette, I'm putting a whole bunch of water and then choosing the same colors or close. Get rid of the excess water from your brush and then apply it over here. I'd like to show this quite close so you see what I'm talking about. So the difference between that and this is that you achieve a smoother surface and you can spread out your colors, your paint much easier here than when it comes to water. When you dilute your colors with water, what happens, it blobs on some areas, gathered on some areas, and creates some sort of a puddle. and it makes that area quite darker than other places. There are ways to kind of manage that and like remove the excess water, just like the way I did. But overall, the result that you achieve by using a matte medium or glazing medium is much better. Now, I just want to go back to the painting and try to finish the shirt. Right now, I'm just working on the shaded areas, shadows. Trying to keep the contrast, bring that out. And by the way, I actually chose the same color as Prudence for the focal point or the major character of my painting. I had too much water on my brush. I need to remove some of that and get back to it. I'd like to add a little bit of yellow to the shirt. So I'm going to mix that yellow on the highlighted area. That's what I'm trying to do. Use more matte medium, mix it with my paint, make it more diluted. If you feel like you're not sure what kind of consistency you receive from that mix, you can always have a piece of paper and try your color aside to make sure that's what you want. If it's not working, then you need to go back and make more. Yeah, this is actually the color I was looking for. I'm just going to give more definition to that. If you feel like you don't like the harsh edges between, let's say, shades and highlights, if you want to blend them in, you need to remove the pressure of your hand to make things a little bit smoother. Or remove the excess color from your brush and gently try to blend these two surfaces. Sometimes it's not that easy because acrylic gets dried up quite easily, fast. So what you need to do again is go back to this color, make your surface wet again, this, and then try to blend that. See, now it is much better. If you make a mistake by adding and applying colors on where you don't want to, you can easily rub your finger, or you can just use your paper towel to remove that extra. Okay. Oops, sorry. Just a little bit more. Add more of that. Just trying to finish the shirt right now. And then I will go on the skin and talk about a little bit of flesh tones and how you can achieve the flesh tone colors. Okay. I think this is enough. I like how it is looking. What we need to do and what we need to aware of is the edge that is cutting from the background to our image. This edge is not necessarily pleasant. Sometimes you need to reduce the contrast between that, and this is exactly what's happening on my artwork because the contrast is quite high. This is quite sharp and bright versus that dark background. So what I will do, I will go and try to make the background color and go around that a little bit and try to blend that in, remove the contrast by adding a little bit of more darker shades on some areas that is applicable, like on the sleeve over here or over here. And don't worry about if it goes on top of your image, that is completely fine. Sometimes what you need to do is maybe you need to remove the contrast or the darkness of your background to make them closer to each other. Now, let's move on to the skin colors and skin tones. Flesh tones are usually made by the three primary colors, which is yellow, red, it can be cadmium red, which is a warm red, or alizarin red, which is the cool red, and your ultramarine blue. Not much of that. You for sure need your white as well. So what you need to do is pretty much you need to create, to start with, a brownish type of color. And when you mix all these colors with each other, you get that type of, that brown. You just need to eyeball and see how much the proportion of each paint needs to be done. Overall, you need to have way more yellow than red and blue. Blue, you don't need much. Some people have more like pink in their skin. Some tend to have more blue and some yellow. Now, what needs to be done over here? Let me actually clean this palette a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, this is the main color that I came up with. If you add the white, then voila, you've got your flesh tone. This can be used for the darker tones or shades. This can be used for the highlights. You can go lighter than this and darker than that, redder than this, pinker than this. It depends on your reference. For this one over here, I prefer to make it a little bit more pink than what I created over here. And now that I have that color, I'm going to mix it with my matte medium. Now switching to my smaller brush. Starting with my hand over here. It's too dilute. Down there. Apply it on the darker area. As you go further away from that, you can actually mix and add your white to get the highlighted area. Now the edge is quite sharp between the shadows and highlights. So what needs to be done is clean your brush, go back to it and gently move these two towards each other. This is all the detailed areas, and you need to pay attention. Sometimes you need to add or change the nature of your color to make it more pinkish. Sometimes you need to make it darker, like when it comes to here. So this way, what is going to happen is your image is actually going to look more painterly than a photocopied image. You're just following the same references that you have on your image. Where it is shaded, you're just going to apply darker color. Where it is highlights, you're going to apply lighter colors. Just like that, and blend them in gently. Now
Hello, Golriz.
Yes.
I'm just coming in with a question from the audience. So several people were working with watercolors instead of acrylic. And as you're working, I was wondering, how might you be working differently on this image if you were using watercolors instead?
Yeah. Watercolor is a bit different. So I would actually you would need to use some of your matte medium if you are going to use the image for sure, or something to actually protect your image surface. Because if you add watercolor, it has lots of the water that is inside that paint, and it's going to actually wreck your image. So you need to have a protected surface on your image before working with watercolor on top of it. If you have that, it can be matte medium, it can be Mod Podge, then you're good.
Wonderful, thank you. We have about 10 minutes left to the event, so if people have questions for Golriz, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Now, I'd like to work on these herons, the black and white images that I have, so you'll see the difference and what's going to happen on them. Dark on dark usually won't be seen much. So what I tend to do is just by adding a little bit of white to, let's say, the blue that I'm using, and it doesn't have to be necessarily the color of the bird itself, which is not in my case, and just color it like that. Again, just like your portrait or the clothes that is on the shirt, you can actually use darker tones and mid-tones for the shaded areas. Spread that out over there. And when we get to the highlighted areas, you can make your colors lighter by adding a little bit of sometimes white, sometimes yellow, depending on your subject. I'm trying to mimic the feathers of bird over here so that it can have the texture closer to what it looks. Sometimes all you need to do is just a wash. A wash would be one color mixed with your matte medium or glazing medium, I should say. And just wash over the whole thing of one blue. This is what I'm doing right now. If you want to, you can go out of the edges of your subject or your image. Right now that I'm looking at my painting, I feel like the hair and this connection between that and that is quite high, and that bugs me. So I'm just going to do what I exactly said right now to do. You can actually go out of your image surface or borders and continue painting that the way you want to.
Another question coming in from the audience. So someone is wondering if gesso is recommended every time a painting is created, or only in specific cases?
No, gesso is recommended every time you paint with acrylic on paper or wood panels. If you are painting on a canvas with acrylic, then you're good. But if you're painting on paper or acrylic, or I'm sorry, wood panels, or even these cardboard boards, then yes, for sure you have to have that.
Thank you. And another question that's coming in is in terms of the images that you have. So what's best to work with? Is it best to print the images on regular paper, use a photograph, use something from a magazine? What works best when you're working in mixed media?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for asking that. I should have mentioned that, and I apologize for that. The best image is the printed photo or photocopied images, because the other, like when you can collect the images from your from magazines, they usually have a high gloss layer on top of them, which makes it quite hard to blend in with your background. If you decide to do that, then that would be best if you actually varnish your whole painting with a high gloss layer of varnish so that they would blend all into each other. But normally I would say your best choice is just using the printed offs. Even if you have a photo from your photo album, just go scan it and print it off. That gives you a much easier time to work on.
Thank you. I'll let you work a little more and then I'll come back with some more questions.
But I'd like to get back to some facial features to bring out some of the things this would do. As I mentioned, keep a piece of paper always beside your painting so you can verify and see what type of colors you made on your palette. You can't always judge based on what you've done and what you see on your palettes. So as you see, this stage of painting is very translucent, really slow. You have to take your time and form that. Sometimes even after a day or so, I go back to my painting and I feel like, okay, there was one area I needed to get adjusted, or I needed to bring back the contrast on some areas. You can totally do that if that happens. It doesn't have to be finished in one go. I'm using more bright colors for my portrait right now that I'm having. As you see, when you compare that, it becomes more alive when you add this glazing layer on top of your image. It doesn't really matter even if you have a colored print, you're still going to have it, the colors are going to be muted. So you need to enhance the colors by doing the glazing on top. I'm just gonna go with highlights. I'm just gonna make sure that the color is okay. Sometimes you might need to have a sharper highlight. As soon as you feel like something is overpowering, the color is taking over the whole thing, all you need to do is rub your brush against a rag or paper towel, remove all the extra paint from it, and then gently spread that out and rub it over on your surface, and then you get that. That's exactly what happened on my painting.
So earlier you mentioned recommending that you let layers dry as you're working.
Yes.
There was some questions around, how long might this take? And also, is there ways to accelerate that drying process?
Yeah, totally. I use a heater, usually depending on what layer you're talking about. If you're talking about the matte medium or the glue layer, that layer normally takes about 5 to 10 minutes. It's very quick, actually, especially if you're in a warmer temperature room. For the paint itself, it might take up to 20 minutes. There are a couple of ways. I use my heater. Some people use blow dryer, hair blow dryer, to get that dried up quickly. These are actually the only two ways that I know of that I've used. But I will actually review right now. So there were 2 layers in between that I said, or 3. The first layer was gesso. Gesso your prime your surface with gesso, let it dry for 10 to 15 minutes, then start painting. When you start painting, again, you need to give it 15 minutes to, you need to wait for 15 minutes for that paint layer to get completely dry. And then the third layer is when you're applying the glue to the back and front of your images. And for that, you need to probably 5 to 10 minutes, and then that's it.
Thank you. So we have about just a few minutes left, so I'll let you finish up.
Thank you, Jessica. Unfortunately, I don't think I would be able to finish this piece right now, but fully finish it. But this is, I'll just take it as much as I can. Don't worry if something like that happens. That's totally normal. You can fix it. As I mentioned, acrylic is a very forgiving material. It allows you, here, cover it up. Now again, remove the extra paint and water from your brush. Get back there, try to blend it in. Something to note is you need to make sure to not overwork on this, because what's going to happen is actually going to wreck your whole image. And you don't want that. And this is what exactly happening right now on that part of my painting. But I have to get rid of this unwanted darkness that I just applied.
Thank you, Golriz. It seems like a good spot to end, like, you know, not overworking, stopping when we feel like it's a good moment to stop. So we can see. Thank you.
Yes.
So I want to say a heartfelt thank you to Golriz Rezvani for this workshop. If you want to follow Golriz's work, you can do so through her Instagram at Golriz Rezvani or her website, www.golrizrezvani.com. I also want to thank Alexia for sharing an artwork from the Uninvited exhibition with us. Uninvited Canadian Women Artists in the Modern Moment is on display at the gallery from March 3rd to August 20th, 2023. If you wish to participate in more virtual workshops, there's an appliqué beaded pin workshop that will take place next week on Thursday, March 23rd. We invite you to register through the gallery's website. We'd love to see what you made tonight if you want to share it with us, and we're inviting you to share it on social media by using the gallery's tags that you can currently see on the screen. I'd like to say a big thank you to each of you for coming to make art with us. A big thank you to Golriz Rezvani for facilitating this workshop, and I'm wishing everyone a good rest of the day. I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Jessica.